Particularly on nights like tonight, the most important night of our year, we remember that everyone here, everyone at Congregation Beth Yeshurun comes in carrying a story that runs the course of their lives, the people, the events that define our Jewish lives. This is ours. As you listen, participate. Participate by thinking about yours. Think about the role that Beth Yeshurun has played in the path that led you to this moment. My inner dialogue starts about 15 years before I was born. I find great meaning in the fact that my role model, my mother of blessed memory, was the first young woman to be bat mitzvahed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on a Saturday with the Torah. They didn't do it before 1955. It happened at the conservative synagogue where she grew up, in Squirrel Hill. Many of you are probably familiar with it. Just 7 years after that, she married my father at that same synagogue. It was like that, 7 years after your bar mitzvah, you were getting married and starting a family. 7 years after that, they moved to Houston. I was born, but I remember that tree that was painted on the social hall on the wall at Beth Yeshurun from when I was a kid. And it was the first thing at Tree of Life, when I was a kid and went there. And it was the first thing that I thought about on October 27th, 2018, when that Tree of Life became the site of what is still the deadliest incident of anti-Semitic violence in this country. And a reminder that our Jewish houses of worship, we as Jews are always vulnerable. We as Jews are always at risk, and we as Jews must always protect each other. Just a few weeks ago, I drove by that same Tree of Life, which is now a construction site being rebuilt with memorials of the 11 people who lost their lives. Now, after my family relocated to Houston, we joined a different synagogue in town, Emmanuel. And at that time, looking up at the Bima on nights like tonight, I saw Rabbi Kahn. To this day, Rabbi Kahn's image is what I see when I close my eyes and think of God. I shudder to think that some of your children have the same image of Brian Strauss. But I'm relatively confident that Brian Strauss is not God because he grew up a cowboy fan.
If you asked me to tell you about some of my favorite childhood memories while growing up in South Africa, I'd tell you all about alternating Friday night Shabbats with my aunt, uncle, cousins, and grandparents. Those nights around the table were more about tradition than feeling. Until later when we immigrated and I began 4th grade at Beth Yeshurun Day School in 1981. I remember every week our grade would gather in the chapel for services. Rabbi Siegel would share his wisdom, and Cantor Wagner would sing the prayers and melodies that have become the soundtrack that I still hear in my head each Shabbat today. For the first time, I didn't just know I was Jewish, I truly felt Jewish. I felt the warmth, I felt belonging, and I felt the embrace of community.
You're welcome. My mother, who I mentioned as my role model, died when I was just 23 years old in law school. When I moved back to Houston shortly after that, I was back in my hometown, but I didn't know very many people at all. A lot happened in those years before Jean and I met through the JCC dating service in 1997. And in 1999, we were married by Jean's family's rabbi at the time, Rabbi Radinsky from UOS. We took a honeymoon shortly thereafter in Italy, where we visited the Jewish sites, including a site that we got a watercolor from in order to commemorate what we were really shocked to see, which was the ghetto in Venice that was first opened in 1516, over 500 years ago, the first ghetto in the world, the first use of the term ghetto in the world, which is a reminder to us at that time that we still carry with us with that watercolor that, this has always been the Jewish experience. The Jewish experience has always been vulnerable. And there in Venice, the synagogues were not like this, grand structures with historical markings. They were hidden, marked only by the 5 windows for the 5 books of the Torah that were visible and are still visible today as they're preserved in the ghetto in Venice. Shortly thereafter, we started a family, and frankly, my dad died shortly after that, when our first child wasn't even 1 year old. It was when my dad died, without belonging to a synagogue in Houston anymore, and our first child was ready to go to school, that we realized it was time for us to join a synagogue. At the time, you could have counted the number of people that I knew at Beth Yeshurun on 2 hands. Robin and Josh Barry, who knew us both before we were married, a few guys from the JCC Basketball League, and actually Edgar Goldberg.
Joining Congregation Beth Yeshurun for our family was an easy decision, because I always held on to the sense of warmth and belonging I felt when I first emigrated here as a kid. That feeling has continued to guide me, and I see it reflected in the way my own family is embraced here. When our twin boys, Reuben and Dylan, began preschool here, I started substituting. Not long after, I was offered a job as an assistant teacher. It's now 19 years later, and I'm still teaching kindergarten at the Jack Siegel Academy of Beth Yeshurun. This community has shaped not only my children's Jewish journey, but also my own, as a parent and as an educator. My children grew up here. Our daughter Carolyn became a bat mitzvah on the very spot where I'm standing right now. And Reuben and Dylan had their own b'nai mitzvah just down the hall as the first, or maybe the second, b'nai mitzvah in Friedman Levitt after it opened following Hurricane Harvey. But it hasn't just been simchas at Beth Yeshurun. We were fortunate enough to join the family mission trip to Israel led by Rabbi Strauss. There we celebrated b'nai mitzvahs and built lifelong friendships. Together we've welcomed Shabbat, we've marked the high holy days, and celebrated countless simchas within this congregation. For our family, Judaism and Beth Yeshurun has been about religious ritual and tradition and so much more. It has been about connection to each other, to tradition, and about being a part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
We've shared the most important and sometimes most traumatic experiences of our lives with the community of Beth Yeshurun. I've mentioned before how memorable it was to me when the community came together and all got swabbed to get on the bone marrow registry when Michael Wiesenthal got sick. Of course, many of us were here with one of the most horrific sights of my life, which was here in Barg Sanctuary when Robin and Josh's caskets were in the front during that memorial ceremony. We became even closer when we overcome adversity after Hurricane Harvey through the pandemic and in the 726 days that have elapsed since October 7th. The world tests us so many ways, and we require a positive environment. We require to be surrounded by the positive energy that comes from places like Beth Yeshurun in order to survive and pass those tests. Congregation Beth Yeshurun has made us more Jewish, way more than 10%. When we first started at Beth Yeshurun, as I said, I knew very few. Now I know literally hundreds of people who are in this synagogue, in this sanctuary right now, who are across the hall in the chapel and who are in the museum Minyan. And when you ride that kind of wave over the course of just a single generation, as Jean and I have been honored enough to do, you create so much positive energy and you develop a debt of gratitude that can only be repaid by giving back to Kunalam, by giving your time, by giving your resources, by giving your energy, by sharing this experience with everyone, as we're trying to do today. Now more than ever, Beth Yeshurun faces uncertainty and vulnerability. I tried to introduce the words tonight a couple weeks ago in talking about what's happening to modern American synagogues and how important the Chai appeal is to this synagogue. And right now, I am going to ask that you show your support. Get out your cards, and let's talk about it for a second. Now, I would like to quote my good friend Jared Bloom, who last year said that he expects 100% participation. Now, it is, of course, your first official and public chance to show that you are at least 10% more Jewish this year, as the rabbi has asked, and if so, we're able to raise over 400. If each person gives just 10% more than they did last year, we're able to raise $440,000 for this community. For Jean and I, there were years we were paying so much tuition for our kids that we could barely do anything, but we always gave a little. And there are other years when we were doing really well and we could give a lot. It's at this time that I ask you to look at your family. And as we previously discussed, the average pro rata, so to speak, proportionate share of the cost of your family at Beth Yeshurun is $3,400. That doesn't mean that you are $3,500. That doesn't mean that you have to pay $3,500. But it does mean that if you want to close the gap between where your family is in that, today is the day that you have the opportunity to do it. And no fear, if you've already given, you can give again. And in fact, I wanted to get the rules straight on that because I know so many of you want to do that. So as I ask all of our current board members and anybody else who wants to volunteer to stand up and collect people's pledge cards, I make this request of you. Rethink what you gave. Be willing to give more, 10% more, or whatever it takes in order for you to acknowledge and recognize the value that Beth Yeshurun has provided to all of us. And in doing that, I got the rules straight. The rules are that if you have already given and you put down fold down a thing or write something, it will be added to, it will be cumulative of whatever you have given in the past. Thank you for doing your part to sustain this amazing community. So much to our children, and I hope that you identified, as I hope your story resembles ours, and that you truly appreciate how very lucky we are to be here. Shana Tova.